Hey, good evening, folks. Just getting the last few to get to their seats this evening. Brilliant. How amazing. Wow. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening on a cold Monday in January. What an impressive turnout. So really appreciate you all coming down. I'm really excited to be sharing with you today our January Product Tank event. Before we get started, just a very quick bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a Product Tank organizer, and in my day job, I am a PM over at Visa. We are hiring, so if you are interested in roles at Visa, do come and speak to me at the end. So, Product Tank. We are the world's largest product community by product people for product people. And I think just a testament today to how many of you folks have come and turned up. I really hope you enjoyed the refreshments this evening, and there will be an opportunity as well to get some more drinks and food at the end. There are a few ways you can get involved in joining the Product Tank community, one of them of which is today, so by coming and watching one of our events. Of course, you can also come and speak, as our speakers do this evening. You can host as well. We are looking for any new sponsorship opportunities. We have currently events planned on a monthly basis throughout the year. And towards the latter half of this year, we do have a few spaces if folks are interested in hosting one of these events. You can also write for Mind the Product. And of course, you can become a member. Tonight, we'll be using Slido to collect our questions for the end, using Q&A. So I encourage you to take a photo here of the QR code or take note of the digit code here. And I will ask if you could please try to hold questions, put them in here, or do hold them to the end. We'll have a dedicated Q&A at the end of this session where we'll go through those. Oh, sorry, I think a few people were still taking photos, so I'll leave that for a moment longer. Brilliant. This isn't your last opportunity. I will flash this slide up again throughout the presentations. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors of this event. So we're here today at RichMix, and this event has been sponsored by Pendo. Excellent. So let's get into it. Today we'll be hearing from three fantastic speakers who have worked in the industry for a substantial period of time, and they'll be talking to us about launching products in established organizations. We'll first hear from Mayank about the dark side of launching products in established organizations, followed by Neil telling us about what good really looks like within these larger organizations, and finally from Debbie sharing her 3 learnings of launching products within one of the largest organizations you can see here, ft.com. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Mayank. Thank you, Mayank. If you could just press the next slides on it.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is quite a crowd for a Monday evening. Okay. All right. I am Mayank. I will introduce myself in a little bit more detail. My product development experience started from Gojek, and Gojek is one of Indonesia's first unicorn, where I took care of the order experience vertical for food delivery. So Gojek is a super app with multiple different products, and I was specifically looking at the food delivery product. Worked there for about 5 years, going from a startup to a big IPO'd company of 5,000 employees. And then I joined Deliveroo, where I looked at acquiring and onboarding merchants. And from there, I've now joined Sneak. I know the spelling and the pronunciation is a little bit different. It's Sneak. It's a B2B SaaS tool for developers. Now, the common theme in this is these are all pretty big scaled up companies. Gojek, 5,000 employees. Deliveroo, again, 4,000 employees. Sneak is almost about 1,000 employees, but the point is these are all sort of established companies, and that's where I'm bringing my perspective from. So as a PM, I don't want to assume things, which is why I will first of all start with establishing what an established company means. So if you look at this graph, any startup starts from there, the drunken walk, goes into product fit, hypergrowth, and then scale. What I'm going to talk about is specifically in that zone, the far right zone of established companies. And maybe we can do a quick show of hands there. How many people are today working at an established company going by this sort of big significant scale? Let's raise your hands, please. Okay, quite a decent amount. I think 50%. Nice. How many of you are in startups? Please raise your hands. Okay, nice. 30%, and I'm guessing, yeah, you're enjoying the drunken walk probably. Okay, so what do established companies really focus on? They either focus on monetizing the core product or exploring new products that complement the core product from a business standpoint, and from a product standpoint, they're going into optimizing various funnels. You've got a good amount of users already there. Now you want to give them a good experience by optimizing those various funnels and focus on customer retention. Customer retention is obviously very important even during the hypergrowth stage, but it becomes even more important during that established phase. So what do established companies have? Brand reputation, financial resources, functional expertise, more teams for execution, and clearer and narrower objectives for teams. But they also come up with its dark side. What is the dark side? Brand reputation, resistance to change. Financial resources lead to sometimes inefficient usage, and functional expertise means you have different functions which are not talking to each other a lot of times. More teams for execution, and for PMs, more stakeholders to manage. That's what we all love, right? And clearer, narrow objectives means that perception, or maybe in actual reality, reduce scope for innovation. Now, take this with a pinch of salt that not all established companies would have the same dark sides. It comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes with different intensities. So my objective here is to just, I'm not going to deny that these don't exist. These exist in some shape or form, right? Everyone would have witnessed that. What my intent is to show you how can you also benefit from some of the experiences and some of the learnings that I've had in terms of navigating these challenges. So I'm gonna start with so let me talk about this product that we built, and I'm going into the building of a product, which is a very concrete example to show how do you navigate such challenges. I don't want to go into theoretical wisdom of do this and do that, but this is for you to absorb and think about how you can apply some of these learnings in your own situation. So this was a particular product where we launched this in 3 weeks, and this resulted in 100 million pounds of revenue. Not exaggerating this. And the context in which I built this was, so this is back at Gojek, where I was leading the order experience team for the food delivery product. My team was responsible for the post-order placement journey. So right after an order has been placed by the customer on the left-hand side, it goes till order delivered. The mission of my team was to ensure that customers always get their food. Forget getting their food on time. This is Southeast Asia back in the day. We are the first ones coming in the market, unprecedented food delivery product, trying to set habits of merchants, accepting orders on a digital app, drivers, getting their first income through the digital app, right? So the challenges were different, just for that context. Now, with that mission, we set out to solve the first problem, which was of booking completions. And just to give a sense of the scale, we were doing about 2 million orders a day. And the primary problem was of driver cancellations. 10% of our orders were getting cancelled because of problems related to drivers, which is about 200,000 people that are starving after placing an order. So terrible, terrible experience that we had to solve, and a big problem for the org. Now, with any product, you always have these dependencies with different teams, right? So this is my chart or customer order experience team wanting to increase completions for the customer. There's a separate merchant team who's looking at the merchant experience. Then there's the driver team who's looking at the driver experience. And the problem is driver experience team, or the complexity rather, is the overlap of the problem area of driver cancellations between customer experience team and the driver experience team. So how do you solve this particular problem of this overlapping problem area? Now, so for some little bit more context, driver experience team wanted better experience for the driver, obviously, but they didn't want, like, cancellations was not a priority for them. Second, the constraint here was driver experience team was a central team. Now, a little bit more context here is Gojek is made of different products, which was ride-hailing, grocery delivery, food delivery, and driver was the central piece of entity, which was essentially tied up to all products. Now, that context is important because the team wasn't set up to allow other teams, the driver team was not set up to allow other teams to actually push changes to them. Now, the common way to deal with such a problem would be, let's get this prioritized, which is the driver cancellation problem, prioritized somehow on the driver experience team. Let's advocate for elevating the priority, etc., which was the common obvious thing. But what was not so obvious for me was decomposing the problem and taking charge of a segment. Now, how did I do this? I know this is a big chart. Okay, don't go into all the nuances here yet. I don't want to focus on what the outcome of this process was, but rather what the process itself was and how can you actually pick this up, which is, we started with, the essential part of the process is you start mapping different sub-problems within the main problem and map the product journey along with that, and also associate what teams can actually own. So that's defining the ownership as well. But this is what the outcome is. I'll probably take up the outcome a little bit later, but the process here itself was actually bringing the team along in the journey. How can we bring team X, who's looking at allocations? How can we bring driver experience team into this whole process of making this visual map? Now, one is, this will start breaking silos. Once anyone looks at this across the three teams, they will immediately get a sense of what the problem area ownership is. And second, this also gives you a scope to innovate. You'll start seeing problem from different lenses. Now, I'll not go into all this huge diagram, but the outcome was the original problem that we started with, completion rates are down because of driver cancellations, turned into completion rates are down because of driver cancellations of type X. And that was something which my team could own and still pick up without any help from any other team. Here, type X could be a sub-reason, could be triggered beyond a certain stage, or a combination of any such parameters. The point is not what that X was, but the process itself. First, of breaking silos by collaborating with different teams to come to this visual map. And second, getting that scope of innovation itself. So what did we do next after having that renewed problem statement? The problem was we picked up this problem. This was type X. Drivers often change their mind to complete the order after acceptance. We did a 3-week MVP. We detect if a driver is moving towards the restaurant in the first 6 minutes, else reallocate that order. This is just a quick way to just show that same information. If the driver is not moving towards the red logo, you detect that he's moving away and reallocate that order to another driver after warning him. So the final solution was, this was a 3-week MVP that we launched. The final solution was a machine learning model where we were predicting the order completion likelihood in real time. And this was the innovation that was only possible because we did the first step of visualizing the problem statement, breaking it down, decomposing it, layering it with product journey stages, and granting the ownership, defining the ownership rather, of different teams. And the final impact was a 5% additional completions, resulting in an incremental 100 million in revenue. Now the point here is I'm not bragging that 100 million revenue number, but the message is, even in an established product, when you're optimizing funnels, this is a completion optimization problem, right? You're trying to complete more orders. You can still have that amount of outsized outcome. So what are the takeaways? One, own the problem area, which doesn't necessarily mean you need to know all of the steps in that whole visual map, but you need to be able to push teams which are adjacent to you to contribute to discovering more in that problem area. Bring everyone along. This is the most important part, because you are not going to alone do this. You need other people to come along with you in this journey, and I think it's easier said than done. We could probably go much more deeper into this topic, but very simple tacts like just having another PM co-author the document with you. That could even, you'll be surprised how many of the times, if you just write the name of the team on the doc, they'll start contributing to it when there is no name as well. Right, so bring everyone along. That's your job as a product manager. And then pick that renewed problem, and ideally a problem which could be isolatedly solved by a team, as well as is critical in the context of that overall picture. So yeah, hopefully you are able to apply some of these things which I shared with you whenever you are in this sort of a situation next time. That's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayank. I think, as Mayank said, around, was it 50 to 60% of the people here today in established organizations, I'm sure that org map resonated with you. I know it did with me. Really good way to think about it. Now, just to flash up again, we have the Slido link. So if you do have any questions directly for Mayank, please do feel free to capture that and pop them in. Slido works in a way where you can essentially pop those questions into us, and then folks around the room can actually vote. So if you do see a question that you think is interesting and you would like to try and see answered, do upvote, and they will come up to the top for us when we get to the Q&A section. Before I very quickly move on, we have 2 more speakers this evening. We'll have a very quick stretch of the legs before we jump into the Q&A. But if you do need to, at any point, run to the bathroom, please feel free to filter out at either side. Excellent. So with that, I will now pass over to Neil.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this Monday night. And normally when you get up to speak, you're kind of worried about, well, will I put the audience to sleep? But last night and this morning I had to fly back from Asia. Spent a week in there, so I flew overnight and I'm severely jet lagged right now. And so therefore, if I fall asleep tonight, it's me, it's not you. But today, so I'm going to talk about launching products in different size companies. And that is mainly startups and established companies. And just quickly go into an introduction. And then I'll talk about really what I think some best practices and what good looks like. As you can tell from my strong accent, I'm from Scotland. Started out as an engineer originally, and then did a PhD thoroughly hated research and being stuck in a room, and so moved into tech consulting for a while. Founder of, a long time ago now, my own sort of LinkedIn-style app for contractors and freelancers. Unfortunately, LinkedIn was infinitely more successful, so therefore it killed that idea. I've worked in a few other companies in the time, and I worked at a startup, some of you may or may not have heard it, called infer. They were like an AI platform, natural language processing platform, before ChatGPT came along and killed it all, and they were acquired by UiPath just last year. I'm currently at Streete, where I head up the EMEA and APAC regions for some of our banking payment methods. So, do we all know what this is? Okay, good. Speedboat. And has anybody been on one of these? Does anybody know how long it would take one of these to turn? Yeah, and about several miles to do so. And sometimes launching a product in a big company feels very much like this. Now, when I talk about a big company, I don't necessarily mean like a large corporate like a GlaxoSmithKline or a Shell. It could be a company that's been around for 15, 20 years, maybe have a company size of a couple of hundred, even up to 100. So kind of any established organization that's been around for a while. And probably generally, product may or may not be the core part of what they do, but at some point they'll obviously be wanting to launch some sort of products. And part of the problem with this is with bigger companies, you just have much more inertia to get products launched. Show of hands if I can see, who's actually worked at a startup here, like a less than 20 size companies? Okay, good, so quite a lot, right. So you kind of generally know that if you work at a startup, there's very little inertia. You can get a lot done very quickly, very easily, it moves very fast. Whereas at established companies, it can be a lot more painful sometimes. And that generally comes down to the motivation. So the motivation and strategy at a startup is often very different from a big company. And that motivation generally kind of isn't always the same. And ultimately, that changes how they operate, how they manage, and how they launch products. And that also sometimes filters down into, or generally filters down into, how they launch their products. And if you launch a product at a big company, it fails, it's unlikely you're going to lose your job. If you launch your product at a startup and it doesn't work, it's the difference between success and ultimately your runway running out of cash. Now, the motivation at a startup is ultimately that. It's their lifeblood. They need it to survive. They need to establish product market fit very quickly. They have a limited runway. And that, in a sense, drives urgency. And you've usually got a limited resource, which that also drives focus. Both actually are a very good thing. And in terms of how that transfers into culture, and by the way, on the flight back home, I was doing some of these slides, so I may have been a bit overzealous with the emojis. But generally, and I'm sure some of you who have worked at a startup will get this, at a startup, when you're building products, they move a lot quicker. There's much more agency and autonomy for what you do. And bureaucracy, structure, processes, which is good and bad, there's much less of them. And that usually means decision is quick. You've got fewer layers in the organization. You can get decisions with the CEO or CPO as quick as you can. It's easy as a PM to have impact. There's much quicker feedback loops with customers. And your engineering teams and teams in general tend to be a lot smaller, focused, and more agile. It's definitely easier to get things done. And as a PM, if you've done it, you have to wear multiple hats. You have to do customer success, some support, some ops, write documents. There's a lot more you have to do, which is good and bad. But you can definitely get your product in front of customers a lot quicker. Now, big company, their motivation tends to be to keep the status quo. They've usually got like a single line of revenue, and they'll generally want to protect that. And that means that they want to minimize risk and generally minimize brand damage. And so launching a product at this sort of company is just much harder. You've just got to go through a lot more rigor, and that's because generally they'll just want to minimize their risk. And so what does that sort of mean? So generally, unsurprisingly, what you get at a startup tends to be the opposite of what you get at a big company, which is you tend to have, and this isn't, again, this is not, it's quite general, so obviously doesn't apply to everyone, but there's generally, I found, a lack of product leadership and culture. Generally in big companies, building products tends to mean agile for a lot of these companies in my experience. or running agile. There's definitely less urgency and definitely a lot more caution, much more bureaucracy, much more structure, much more process. And that's sometimes a good thing, but it can also make decision-making slow. It's definitely harder to get things done, more difficult to have impact, much slower feedback loops, etc. You can kind of read the rest. But definitely they're just much more risk-averse. And that motivation drives how they build products. And so, in my experience from a large company, what would I say principles are, and what does good look like from getting from 0 to 1? So, I don't know if you guys are aware of how Stripe do their products. They have a very big, deep product culture, and it's something that's been there with Patrick and John since they launched. They are very similar to how you might do it at Google, Amazon, Facebook, and that just so happens because lots of our PMs are from those three companies. But as I go through, one of the key things, and Mayan just touched on it as well, is start with why. That's the first thing we always look at. And look at the customer problem versus what is a cool idea. Now, I say a cool idea because sometimes in a large company you may get somebody much more senior, leadership, come to you with what they think is a cool idea and they want you to build it. And generally that's where it comes from, that's where it starts. Like, this is a great idea, this is a cool feature, our customers would love this. And you're like, well, maybe would they? And generally I'd always say, start with this, start with why. And you may have, hands up, who've heard of Simon Sinek. Good, oh good. A cultured bunch. So you recognize this. I'm not plagiarizing it, but ultimately the principle is the same. Always think about what you're doing. So at Stripe, we relentlessly focus on the problem and we relentlessly focus on the user. And if you take any two things away from today, I would say it'd be those two things. And it's very easy, or it's very cheap to find out if a customer will pay for your product through customer development. It's much more expensive to build a product and find out after. And it's really easy to think you have a cool idea and get carried away with a cool feature. You build it and then you find out actually nobody's willing to pay for that problem. In fact, another question is, who actually pays for like to-do apps? So you know these to-do lists that you do, I use it all the time. Does anybody ever pay for it? As the super users in the corner. And the thing is, they're great, they're fantastic. But if I was being asked to pay £10 a month, I would just go and use my notes or something much simpler. And that's because they solve a problem, but the pain isn't big enough that I'm willing to pay for it. And so it's very easy in a large organization to get caught up, as I say, with lots of cool features or a cool idea. And actually, I would suggest doing the exact opposite. Really focus on the problem, focus on the customer problem, speak to your customers, and make sure that pain is big enough, and it's big enough that they're willing to pay for. And certainly don't get caught in the trap of asking your customers if they think your idea is cool, because they will always say yes. That doesn't mean they're willing to pay for it. And I'm sure you guys have done talks on product discovery. There's a lot out there. You can understand it. The Mum Test book is fantastic in doing so, and it works really well. But spend most of your time speaking to your customers. If there's an idea, chat to them, and use that to drive product discovery. Those conversations you have up front will really shape what you do and really understand their pain points at such a deep level. So, don't go broad and build lots of features. Really focus on a deep customer problem and understand, should this be built versus, do we actually want to build this? And next up, now this is a harder one, but really foster a product culture. So it's not an easy thing to do if your company doesn't have a product culture. But if you can foster it internally, then do what you can to educate what the broader organization is, what it means to be product management, and what it does not, which is it's not project management. Be the advocate for the culture that you want and build the right team. Now, this part is very difficult because I guess your company either has that culture or it doesn't, but it can be something that you can build internally, and it's something I would really push for. At Infer, we didn't have a deep product culture, but the team that we had, we slowly built it up, and it made such a difference in the 3 years that we were there. And again, you can do that in whatever size of company you're in. But the other thing I would say, and this is the next biggest part, is become a writer. And what I mean by that is to think well. Was that me? To write well is to think clearly. And at Stripe, I don't know if we copied Amazon. I'm sure you've kind of heard of the. That definitely wasn't me. Can you guys still hear me? Yeah. We'll keep going. And so I don't know if they copied it, but Stripe is very, very big on written documents. And I mean long-form documents. I don't mean PowerPoint slides that summarize a lot of bullet points, ironically, but long-form documents and going really deep into a subject. And that really matters at Stripe, and because it allows you to really go deep into your thinking and go deep into the detail and summarize it for the audience. You have to work very hard when you're writing your documents to make it very clear for the reader. And everything we do involves writing long documents. We don't do PowerPoint slides, what some of our sales team do in our GTM for customers, but it's PMs, partnerships, all of our teams, even engineers, we write long form documents because clear writing requires clear thinking. It's key for knowledge sharing, and it always means that you start from the user's perspective. And it's not just PMs that do it. We have our partnerships, our risk, our engineer, our sales. Everybody does it, and it means that the clearest and the best ideas get brought forward instead of the loudest voices. And as part of that as well, they're very humble in that. At Stripe, there is no senior PM, there is no VP PM. Everybody is just a product manager, even the most senior people, and they just have different levels in there. And therefore, when you're writing a document, you're responding to comments. You don't, it could be the CPO. You have no idea, unless you know who they are, or they have no idea that you're maybe a lower level, etc. So your comments are just as valid. And we get our CTOs coming in. They will ask details about our APIs that are so detailed you'd think they're a day-to-day engineer. And so from this, though, we use something called product shaping. So this is really just, before you get to a PRD or a product strategy or something very deep, before you decide to build something, we do a product shaping, which is just, let's create an outline of a solution. It doesn't get to detail, and it fills the gap between product strategy and PRD. And what it does is it really front loads all the critical thinking. And it always, always, always ties back to a solid user need. And I've never worked in a company before where we had to write documents like this. It was always slides. And I'm such an advocate of it now, so I would encourage you, become a writer and really try to start to convince anybody you work with to write long form documents. It really does make a difference. Next one is data. Data. I don't know if you've seen Friends, still love this. As long as the charts go up, then I'm happy. Now, this is a contentious one. So everybody knows that data-driven decisions are great, and they're sort of like your compass, they guide you. But I would sort of say if there's anything you can really do under the hood to get access to either your existing customer data or new data, do as much as you can for this. It's such a powerful combination when you pair it with the writing. It really helps you tell stories, and it facilitates much greater control in decision making. At Stripe, we have access to every single payment, every single customer, every single segment. It's quite overwhelming the level of data we have, and we have a really cool SQL front end that we build on. And it has been such a game changer for not just what I build, how we build it, what we prioritize, and what our product strategy is. So if you can, leverage as much as possible. How are we doing for time, guys? Are we okay? Good, excellent, right. And so if you have to write documents, there's something really, in fact, has anybody ever written a document, a slide draft, a PRD, a design? You spent ages doing it, and then you take it to one of your stakeholders, and they're like on a completely different page from you. Yeah? And so I would massively encourage you to overcome the resistance to share and share early. So when we write something, we write a really skeleton draft, get feedback from as many different teams as we possibly can, risk, compliance, finance, marketing, the teams that you wouldn't think might have a view, but surprisingly come in with some really insightful comments and feedback, and then we update it and revise it, and we just keep going round and round. And this could happen 10, 15 times. And it really does help shape a document. And so I would sort of urge you to embrace feedback, share early, share often, and get cross-functional teams to review it and do it as early as you can. Keep revising and don't be scared of it. It can be quite daunting to sort of open up a document and see what you think is lots of critical comments. And actually, you can kind of feel a bit vulnerable, but it really does help you grow, and it does make such a big difference to the end product. And so, I'd also say, warm up the audience. And by this time, similar to before, get your teams, now it depends how you guys launch your products and what you have there. We have a very strict launch process, and to do that, before we can launch, we have to get every single team involved, and they have to sign off before we're allowed to launch anything, before we're allowed to GA to the public, or even go to certain betas. And on this, I would say, same thing. In my experience, start early. Get a process if you can. So you may or may not have a launch process where you are. It could be a spreadsheet. You could use Jira. Other brands are available. But again, same thing. Get your cross-functional teams involved early. It uncovers problems, uncovers blockers, and really it's just a great way to de-risk any launch. And it can be really super simple. And it really is just, the key is to make sure you get these teams involved early. Speak to them. Let them read your PRDs, let them understand what you're doing, and make sure all your key documents are up to date. And it can also help remove some of your own biased thinking. Now, having said all of that, there's no single framework. And as PMs, I know we all love frameworks, especially some of the social media gurus. They love a good framework. And so not all of these things will work for you in the different businesses you do. But sometimes you've got to figure out what's the right lever for you to pull. Sometimes to get something launched or to get something launched quicker, you might need to write a business plan. Your leadership or your stakeholders might sometimes need a really convincing ROI. They might need to see the finance. How much will we make? What will we do on this? You might need a key stakeholder just to back you. You might need a customer that says they'll pay for it. You might need a detailed PRD, cross-functional alignment, the right funding, the right team. No matter what it is, I would urge you to kind of figure out in your company what is the right lever that you need to pull to get it launched and focus on that. But having said all of that, no matter what happens, that the product will still succeed or flop at the hands of the customer. And the main point today is more that what you need to do should be driven by the customer problem that you're always trying to solve. Focus on that and you won't go wrong. There we are. Right. One thing I want to cover. Still have time? Good, excellent. Right. So one of the case studies I want to cover is where we failed, and we failed really badly. So I was at a company, and classically, somebody in leadership, this is 2017, maybe 18, way before blockchain and crypto really kicked off, and before anybody had thought of NFTs, and what a terrible idea they are. And somebody's like, oh, we have to use blockchain. This is a really cool technology. That was their idea. And they wanted to build this product that would sort of take out the middleman in the investment trade lifecycle. That part's kind of relevant. But they spent 1 year, I think, to 18 months development time and resources spent. There was hundreds of thousands in sunk cost. And there was by the end, there was no uptake by customers in their main product. And there was a sort of an offshoot of a feature, and that was more popular. So in the end, that was pivoted. And overall, the initial project got pulled. And kind of, I thought back onto this project and why it was so bad and why it failed. And it goes back to what I said. The original product wasn't solving a problem big enough for the customers. They liked the idea, they thought technology was cool, but they weren't willing to pay for it enough because the problem it was solving just wasn't big enough. And it was actually a solution looking for a problem. Anybody who knows blockchain will know that a lot of solutions could be solved by a permission database, which is what this could have done. And the motivation was really just to use cool new technology as opposed to, solving a real need. And it was driven as well, as some of you may have had this in your companies, by, individual career aspirations. And ended up being overly expensive. The solution wasn't scalable. Blockchains used in financial transactions, the two just don't quite go together yet. There's just not the speed. And this is something that always stumped me. They were really keen on using Agile. So I think it was 2017, 18. It was really popular at the time still. But they couldn't quite let go of waterfall. So they wanted like a 900-line project plan in Excel. But they wanted to do Agile. And as well as these key stakeholders, they just weren't fully bought in. So nobody, there was the PRDs that the full team had at the time, they weren't detailed enough. The communication with the senior stakeholders wasn't enough. There was too much short-term thinking. And a large part of it was just, bad ideas, bad execution, and bad communication between the two. And I look back at this and think, all the stuff I've just said in terms of being clear in what user problem you're solving, write those documents, share early, and do as much as you can along those roads. And so thank you for listening.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Amazing. Thank you, Neil. Really appreciate that. And apologies for the slight technical difficulties. I'm just going to check. Is everything all right at the top there? All good? Brilliant. Thank you. Fantastic talk. And we'll jump into Debbie very shortly. But I just wanted to share, actually, a little funny anecdote that we've just come across, which is for those that are paying attention, the QR code here today actually links to the November event. So it's an outdated QR code. What does that mean? We've actually inadvertently done a little bit of an A/B test between how many people go to the digit code and how many people go to the QR code. For those of you that are interested, most folks are using the QR code. I do have access to both on my device when we get to the questions, so please do feel free to continue adding questions in there. But yeah, a little funny story for you. But I will stop there, and I will pass on for our final talk of the day, and then we will have a short break before we jump into Q&A. So over to Debbie.
Good evening, everyone, and it is just coincidence that Neil and I are Scottish, no conspiracy theory at all. I get a bit more Scottish when I get excited, so if I get too Scottish, just wave and I'll slow down a bit. So I'm Debbie McMahon. I am Product Director at the Financial Times, running ft.com, and I'm here to talk today about launching new products in companies where it's a big deal. So I'm definitely going to repeat some of the stuff that Mike and Neil have said before, but hopefully with a sort of set of lessons learned from actually launching a new product quite recently. So, me, Debbie, as I said, prior to working at the FT, I worked at the BBC, and then before that on Universal Credit. So all big established companies, and in all of those places I've launched new things, and I am still standing. The Financial Times has been around since 1888, so it's 135 years old. For anybody who doesn't know it, we're the thing in the newsstand that's printed on pink paper. Yes, to make us stand out. There's a big whole backstory about that I'm not going to go into here. We're a financial media subscriptions business who are at the premium end of the market. And the reason I say we've been around for 135 years, or since 1888, is to sort of make everyone realise how important the FT's reputation is to it. So everything I talk to will be couched in the fact that that reputation is something that the FT has taken 135 years to build and intends to be around for another 135 years to use that reputation. Does anyone recognise this feeling? Launching a new product often feels like this. Whether you're in a tiny startup whose lifeblood is getting something new out the door, or whether you're in a huge company like Google whose whole being is launching new stuff, it's really, really hard. And no matter how great a team you have, or how much buy-in you have, or how prepared you are for launching a new thing, it can often feel like this. So imagine if you work in an environment that's not either of those two extremes that I've talked to. If you're somewhere in the middle, an established company that already has a somewhat successful or maybe very successful existing product, and you're trying to do a new thing. That fridge is really, really big and really, really heavy. So I'm going to talk today mostly about the edit. I run the B2C part of the FT's business, and officially the brand teams say I have to tell you that the edit, which is a much smaller, cheaper, standalone app, a sort of FT Lite subscription, I meant to say that it's our first new product launch in 10 years. In actual fact, ever is the answer. We've never, ever actually launched anything new. So this is the FT's first new product. We launched it just over a year and a half ago in sort of spring of 2022. Now, when people come and talk to me about launching new things and ask for advice, almost always the thing they're starting off with is the idea they have, or the problem space that Neil spoke to so well, or the problem that they've identified, and whether that is a big enough problem, a good enough problem, is it a good enough idea, is the solution strong enough? Almost always, I back up and go, actually, almost all the work in getting something out the door in an established company is not the idea. That's the fun bit. the bit that you've probably done already. The real work is everything else that goes around that idea. So if you think you've done something and it's not been successful, or you've not managed to gain traction through all the things that Magnil talked about, often people throw out the idea and start again with a new idea, rather than actually figuring out, was it the idea at all, or is it everything else around it? So, in launching new products, here's 3 lessons I have learned and have been subject of. Not having a clear enough why, not really listening, and not nailing the team. So I'll speak to each of these in turn. So firstly, figure out the why. You've heard that. That's clearly a theme of today, so I will not bang on about it loads and loads. But the 2 things I would ask everyone to really ask themselves when you're in a place where you want to launch something new is, do you understand why you or the organisation really do need to launch something new? Everyone wants to because it's super cool, but do you actually have to? Should you be iterating out of something that already exists? Should you be scrapping something and starting again somewhere else? Do you really need a new thing? Are you really sure? Secondly, what is the wider strategy for the organisation that your new product, your new thing will be part of? Occasionally, in an organisation, they take a bit of a left turn and you do something that's a bit separate from what you have at the moment. Now that, you will know if that's you. Lucky you in most cases, because you will get to be a bit separate. That brings other problems, but that's for another talk. If that's not you, you really need to be able to explain why the thing that you want to launch, or that your team wants to launch, or that you and your stakeholders want to launch fits into that bigger strategy. How does it hit the organisation's North Star? How does it fit in with other work that other people are doing? How does it deliver the benefit to the organisation that the organisation is trying to achieve this year or next year, or whenever you think you'll be able to launch it? If you can't articulate that, it is super, super hard, no matter how cool it is, to get anybody in an established organisation, regardless of your size, to pay any attention to it. Because they're looking at that thing over there, that wider strategy. That's what their goals are set on. And if you don't have a strategy, that fridge, remember that fridge? It's really, really big and heavy. It's going to push you right back down to the bottom of the hill. Having no strategy ultimately will become an insurmountable, hard word to say, struggle. So how did this manifest for us in the edit? Well, the edit team had been in the organisation for a few months before I joined, and I was delighted to see when we joined that we had a super clear strategy. This is called the martini glass funnel. You can tell I like cocktails. And it was super, super clear to us in the organisation that there was a really clear inflection point where we had a group of warm customers who told us they liked the FT, they liked our content. You know, I'm selling content, I'm not selling a product. But that the price points that we had at that point were too expensive for them. But they would pay for our content, just not the prices that we had. And that their needs were slightly different. That was all great. So what was the problem if we did have a clear strategy and it fitted into what the organisation was trying to achieve? Well, ultimately, in an organisation that's never launched something new, if you then for a while go and work on this new thing that sits within a clear strategy, guess what happens? The product becomes the strategy. The 2 things became incredibly conflated and tied together. So everyone's hopes, dreams, their new feature idea, the 10x growth that we were going to get, the revenue projections, everything became tied up in this one little product that was only meant to be an experiment, an idea, a kind of, maybe, let's try this. It became the strategy because we hadn't really set the 2 things apart. They had become immediately intertwined. So that was making it really, really difficult to get anything done. So working with the CPO, we tried to reset expectations, reminding people what we were trying to do in the organisation as a whole, that we were trying to separate our B2B and our B2C business, and that we were trying to identify those different needs, but then fill gaps in our product portfolio, and that the edit was just one test at one price point and at one place in that different portfolio that we were looking to work in. It was just the first place we'd started rather than the only place. These slides are not dated incorrectly. These really were when they were done to demonstrate like the journey we were going through. This really helped. It really helped set and remind people that there was a wider strategy. It wasn't just about this one product. It also helped that our B2B business sort of got up and running and did some more stuff in their space as well, which was fantastic. Did it solve all the problems? Did it mean that people were a bit like, oh yeah, carry on, just you experiment in the corner and don't us worry? No, of course it didn't, but it definitely helped. So the lesson I learnt there is repeat, 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 restate, 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 and do all that again and again and again. And also remind people and get them excited about the strategy, not the product. We spent way too much time getting people excited and bought into the specific thing, not the idea we were trying to achieve. So, secondly, listen. Listen. 2 questions again. Are you really listening? Not what you want to hear. Not the people who are saying, great, how exciting, I'm delighted, how can I help you? The people who are either not speaking or asking questions that don't make any sense or that you don't really understand. That's the people you really need to be listening to. And you need to listen to what they're actually saying, not what you would like them to say or what they say on the surface. And who haven't you spoken to? I think absolutely Neil picked up on this. Did one of my teams in a later product launch, spoiler alert, we launched the edit and we have since launched 3 other new things in the last 18 months. So it is possible, it is possible. Did one of my teams, knowing that it would be really, really tricky for finance to deal with one of the things that we were about to launch, did they leave talking to them till like literally weeks before? Yes, they did. Do I bear the scars of this? Yes, I do. Don't do that. Bad mistake. If you've not spoken to someone or your team hasn't, there usually is a reason. And it's almost never a good one. So really think about how your individual organisation runs. If you've launched something new somewhere else, do not assume it will be the same. Done that too. Really think about what it will take in this place to get something out the door. So what lessons have I learned about listening, other than that last painful one? Ultimately, it's that new product development requires extra empathy for you as a product manager. Empathy is one of the key skills for a PM. But new product development is different, particularly in an organisation where you don't do it much. You will be way over here in the change curve. You're already beyond it. You're excited. You think this is the best thing ever. You've got a great idea. You really want to do the work to get something new launched. If this person you're talking to, 90% of their time, works on an existing product that they know exactly how it works, they know how to market it, or they know how to do the finance and accounting for it, the idea that you're going to come in and blow their mind with this great idea, I'm sorry, probably that's not what's going to happen. You're probably just going to freak them out because they're in an entirely different place in the change curve than you are. And you really need to think about that. Where is this person that I'm speaking to, and how do I bring them with me, but in a different way than it would be just something for the existing product? They will probably need to do something different. And that's a hard ask of people, particularly when you're not sure it's even going to work. So here's a little story from the edit. One of the things that the team needed to think about was how to launch the new product. That's a big deal. This is our launch plan, obviously slightly simplified for this particular slide deck. But this was essentially the basis of the slide that we used to go to the board and talk about how we were going to launch it. Team had come up with a great idea of doing a friends and family launch to de-risk everything, just get some bits of feedback from people who didn't work at the FT, but yet who were, a more controlled group. We were going to do one of those wonderful test flight launches. MD done that. Oh my gosh, how faffy is it? Codes and links and download test flight. If you haven't done one, don't. But they are quite good for creating control groups of people. So we talked through this slightly more detailed version of this plan that's on the screen. And one of the questions that I was asked by a couple of board members was, what happens if like 1 million people download this in this friends and family test flight thing? And of course, I probably did make a face because I have a very expressive face. But internally, I kind of went, what? That's like the most stupid question I've ever heard in my life. Like, do you not know how complicated? Like, no, we're going to be lucky if we get 100 bits of feedback. I'm going through all this in my head in this split second. And I literally responded with, That's not going to happen. And moved on to the next question. Oh, yes, you realise what a mistake that was. Maybe we were 6-8 weeks later. We were at the point where we were getting close to when we wanted to do our friends and family launch. And for some reason, feature request after feature request for reassurance, requests for changes, requests for additional things, some things we hadn't even discussed being remotely near the start of this product. A couple of them are not even there now, over a year and a half later. Started to come out of the woodwork. And I got frustrated, the team got frustrated, we all got frustrated. It was a back and forth. We got into this big long negotiation of what was it we were launching and why. And it was really painful. A few months later, with hindsight, when I actually had time to breathe, I looked back and went, I was not being asked what happens if 1 million people download this app in friends and family. I was being asked, how are you going to safeguard the reputation of the FT that we have so hard fought and hard won over 135 years? And what is this test flight weird thing that you're talking about? I have no clue what you're speaking about. Those were the questions I was actually being asked, and I didn't answer. And hence the pain that we went through in the sort of 8 weeks beyond that was caused by not listening or not choosing to hear. Amounts to the same thing. So don't do what I did. Listen, and really, really listen. And if you're not sure what somebody's getting at, find a way to talk to them in another forum or another environment. If you think maybe that's a silly question, maybe don't say it's a silly question, but try and find out the thing that's underlying it, the thing that's going to get in your way in the end, when actually there was really legitimate questions there that we hadn't answered. And then finally, it's ultimately almost all about the team. Again, you'll see a theme here, 2 questions. Can the team that you have reach out across the organisation? Again, to what's been spoken about before, people will tell you this is what a new product development team needs to look like and these are the roles it needs to have. Like, that's nonsense. It's really, really situational dependent. Some organisations are willing to put loads of resources and loads of people behind things. Some organisations have different roles and different responsibilities. You need to figure out what's right for you. You might get absolutely no say. But the thing I would hold on to for anyone who has any influence over this or can do any discussions about who, where, what, why, is that the team that iterates on the existing product is not the same team as builds a new product. These are not the same skills, they're not the same people. Some people can do both, absolutely, but you need to think about the focus, and you also really need to think about what mindset do you need in an organisation where it's going to be tough. I'm immediately going to caveat that by saying, but just like this soup, too many cooks can definitely spoil the broth. You ultimately need the smallest number of the rightest people. If you have too many people and you have every team in your organisation represented, particularly for a big organisation, you're going to end up with way too many competing voices, design by committee, inertia, inability to make decisions. That's as bad as having too few people and not being able to truly represent the organisation. You ultimately need to skirt a line between the two and really think about what drives your organisation and what's going to help you get stuff done. Because ultimately, with ambiguity comes everyone's ideas. This is where everyone's hopes and dreams and wish for the existing product that they've never managed to get done or nobody's listened to them, they will all come out when you say you've got a new thing. It's a blank sheet of paper for everyone to be like, oh, my thing that I've always wanted, now is the time. And you as a PM, you will very, very quickly get overwhelmed if you take that burden on yourself. So you need that right team around you who can reach out into their parts of the organisation, talk to people, understand where they're at, understand where ideas are coming from and why, and work with them for you. This is a little artifact that we do actually, last year, to describe to people the life cycle that the team within our organisation went through. We made some choices for the edit. 2 choices in particular that were different to the shape of every team that we normally had. So data science been embedded in the team. That wasn't our normal operating model. And also our editorial colleagues having a dedicated small editorial team who worked essentially hand in glove with the product team. That's not how we operated anywhere else. Yes, closely, but not dedicated people who worked with us. So these were the two departures that we made, and they were absolutely right. Those were the right decisions we made on having a different shaped team than normal. A decision we got wrong, because obviously, as you can tell today, I'm just telling you all the things I messed up, so please don't do them yourself, we chose to replicate how our marketing organisation worked, which was different individuals leading on different parts of the funnel for marketing. We chose to replicate that for the edit. And it didn't take us long to realise that that wasn't right. That wasn't the best way to help our marketing colleagues really focus on the product, or it wasn't also the best way to market a new thing. Very different to marketing an existing product. So we changed that. A few months after launch, we changed to a dedicated product marketing individual who could reach back out into their organisation. But also thinking about how different roles had different levels of involvement and responsibility at different times was partly why we drew up this slide, to also talk to the fact that this was a specific type of product. We've just launched a new product actually in the beginning of January, and it was entirely new content, which the edit isn't. So we didn't have the editorial person embedded in the team, because what would be the point? They'd written all the content in advance. So what we really needed for them was to be dedicated on the content, not really worried about its packaging or delivery. So it's also thinking about the fact that just because a certain setup worked for one thing doesn't mean it will necessarily work for everything. Depends on what you're trying to achieve. And then finally, as we went through the process of building the product, but when you don't really have anything to show, it's really hard to get, one, an organisation excited, but also two, get them giving you the right kind of ideas, the right kind of feedback, helping you think about where stuff fits. So the team created lots of little artifacts like this that people could use to go and talk to their individual teams. To try and, this one was to demonstrate what feeling we wanted the product to create, which was more a kind of, interesting, not like doom scrolling. So we were trying to show that visually without actually having anything to show, to then help the organisation, as I say, understand what we were trying to achieve, but also be like, but we've sort of not figured much of it out yet, so like, yes, your ideas are welcome, but in this direction, because we're not going here, but we are going there. And that really helped, one, mean that, an editorial person didn't have to sort of try and conjure this up for themselves, and also the team were all saying the same thing. We're using these artifacts to talk to the organisation rather than sort of making up their own version of the truth. Definitely a lesson that really helped, but also then were able to be used continually afterwards to show the journey that the product went on. So, if you do all that, you will ultimately have people on board. You will get to the top of the hill with your team in a really cheesy pose, and you will have launched your product. Now, of course, that doesn't tell you whether the product was going to be or is successful or not. That's an entirely different talk. So thank you.
Brilliant. Amazing. Thank you. 3 phenomenal talks this evening. So we are just going to set up the 3 chairs, actually 4 chairs for the Q&A. Like I mentioned, please feel free to take a picture of the QR code here or the code on the screen and add your questions in. It'll take us a couple of seconds to get this up, but what we'll do is we'll try to be efficient with the Q&A so there's opportunity to network as well at the end today. Cool. Cool. You folks ready? Brilliant. So what we'll do is I will go through the Slido ask questions that have been voted up to the top. Pass the mic. I've just been told. Okay. Yes, the Q&A is going to start in here. Yeah. Okay. Can you just check if they're coming back in or if they're heading off? So I think a few folks have popped to the bathroom, so we'll just give them a second to pop through. So. Brilliant. Okay, I think a few people snuck out to the bathroom there, so we'll just give a quick second for folks to filter back in, and then we'll get started with the Q&A. In the meantime, please do add questions to the Slido and upvote. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, we're going to have about 15 minutes of Q&A here, folks, and I will be going through the Slido. Excellent. All right then, refreshing the Slido now. Okay, number one upvoted item we have here, and it's for you, Neil. So there's a question here from the audience around, with respect to your kind of point around building long-form documents, there's a question here around how do you ensure users are actually reading these long-form documents?
I'm really lucky in that sense, in that we have that culture already. So, but something that's practical, especially when you have, everyone's busy all the time. Everyone's lots of meetings. They come to your meeting, whether it's a document or a slide deck. 9 times out of 10 people haven't read it and they end up chatting about it on the call. So something that's super effective is, firstly, we tag people in comments. So we use Google and we just tag people for comments in there at the top of the document, and then if we have comments down the side, we'll tag people in it to review. Usually I let them know that I need their input or want them to read, so just out of courtesy. But what we always do is the start of any call, we all I make sure we just turn our cameras off and everyone reads the documents for 10, 15 minutes. That's possibly the biggest way to get people to read it. And the other part is try your best, and I really can't emphasize this enough, really try your best to distill what you want to say down to just key components. Not ramble, really understand what you want to say it and try and not. And then if you need to, add everything to the appendix. Add all the superfluous stuff to the appendix and at the end. And then, as I say, on the call, tell everyone, turn the cameras off, read the document, and the same with sound, and then we come back and we discuss it. And we literally go through comments. People just, you can see in those 10 minutes, there's just comments just come in, and then we just go through the document. Do that.
Thanks, Neil. Did you have something to add to that? Did you want to add something to that one? No. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I can add it. I think one thing which works really well is like the silent read time plus just blocking the time, and you don't need to even synchronously go through the document. Just give them the time to absorb it, and that context needs to be from your audience. You need to think about what context do they have, because most of the documents that I get into, I'm like, what is the context behind this? I can't even understand. So you need to really write it in that form that someone can very quickly absorb it rather than forcing them to absorb it, right? You have to realize the context that they are coming from. A design team will be coming from a very different context. If you've just mentioned, I'm just giving an example here. Let's improve conversion for this product. Design team is not going to understand that. I mean, they will understand it, but you need to write it as maybe, how can we help improve a certain experience for the customer, right? So it needs to be in the context of that particular audience and be very, very smooth just to read. So yeah, that goes a long way, I guess.
Thanks. The one last thing I've just remembered, actually. I don't know if you've all probably heard of the phrase TLDR or bluff, which is big line up front. We have a lot of this, and that's something that's super helpful, which is real big summary at the top. Summarize your document, exactly what you're saying, what it is you're trying to get across, maybe in 1 or 2 paragraphs. That's the big helpful. Somebody picks it up, they can read it and go, right, exactly. This document's with X, Y, Z. We're making this decision, or we're doing whatever it is. They can read that, and then if they need to, they can jump in or out. That's something else that's super practical.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So a question for any of the 3 of you here, really, whoever wants to take this first. So the question is, fostering a product culture in pockets of an organization is challenging without sponsorship from the very top. How would you go about trying to do so?
Don't go work somewhere else. Super glib answer. But like, it pretty much is my answer in that I would say if there is no sponsorship or insufficient sponsorship, you're not really going to get anywhere. You either need to mold how you do things to a way that will work for the organisation that is getting you in the direction, or you need to find a sponsor. Like, it is almost impossible. Unless you are the CPO or the VP of product, like, it's almost impossible to change enough of an organization to do enough. Like, if you're talking about particularly doing as much as launching a new thing at anything like ground level. Unless, of course, occasionally you might be in an organization where 99% of decisions are made bottom up, and if you are, maybe. But in those cases, like, mostly they have a more product ethos or culture anyway. So I would say there is a head-banging brick wall thing, and that's like just super, super hard.
I've still been thinking about it. Why would you want to change the culture? So that's like changing someone's baby, right? Because the founders have already baked that into somehow, that the processes, the systems, everything is in place. That's like, I'm trying to find a good analogy for doing this, but I think the point is, you can probably change some part of it, but not the overall setup. It's like fighting against a huge headwind. There's no point in doing that. You can definitely adapt certain processes, systems to work in your favor in your hyper-local surroundings, but from the top, I think it's pretty much useless. So yeah, Debbie's point is conquered.
I'll sprinkle a little bit of optimism into here. No, I think, to David's point, I think the answer is it depends. And if you are in a situation where your company, they've made the decisions, they've made the culture, they're really not into it, then I think sometimes you've got to figure out what battles do I want to fight. And, you know, is it easier to go somewhere else? And I've definitely done that before, but I also have done the opposite and really chipped away. And I think some practical things I did was, first I gathered, like, shed loads of content, and I really kind of educated myself on how to build a culture, what a good culture is. And this is you know, pre-Stripe, and you know, and I certainly talk to the CEO, and it depends on the CEO or the CPO or whoever you have, you know, your leadership is, and thankfully the one that I had was quite open, and it was a kind of newish company, and it was they didn't have really any time to think about product, and so I thought, right, I'm just going to do and then take it to them. So I wrote our product strategy. They didn't really care about product strategy until they realised they needed one, because I gave them one. They didn't really think about a North Star metric until I drafted it, and then drafted a bunch of waterfall metrics that came down from it and said, oh, if we did this, then it gives you X. And I always think, whoever the leadership you've got, they've got a million problems all day, every day to think about, and yours is down the list. So it's a case of do what you can to educate them, talk to them, and do that with a view of what's in it for them. What did they get out of this? And I wrote kind of, at the time, like a slide deck on a bunch of stuff and said, here's how our product culture would work. Here's what it gives us. And I think then you kind of saw what it would do to our velocity, how it would sharpen our customer focus. I just then went and implemented a whole bunch of customer feedback processes, built a tool, and then just showed him at the end. And he was like, oh, this is great. Like, you've just taken away a problem that I didn't realise I had and just solved it. And so there are some practical things you can do. And I started creating a hackathon where we just took, it was like a day a month that we just tinkered about with our own projects, came along, and I started to weave some product culture into that. And slowly you can chip away. So there's definitely some practical things you can do on that. If you can, I'd hire some good people. If you're in the stage that you can do that, hire other like-minded people is another thing. But to say, the other thing that worked really well for me was just do it and then show them and just slowly chip away. But it does depend on how receptive your leadership is. That's what it really boils down to. You can't change a baby.
Hopefully not, although with modern technology, we'll see. Okay, so a question over for yourself, Mayank. I think a few people are quite curious about the kind of key differences for you working across in a B2B, like Sneak, versus a B2C space, like Deliveroo.
It's not been a lot of time that I've spent in the B2B space, but I can probably think about a few things that I've seen in that small 5-month time period. So if you think about B2B and B2C, right? B2B, you're selling to businesses. Your buying persona is very different from your users. And if you think about the product development life cycle itself, I'll try and break it down from that development life cycle. You're doing discovery, you're building, you're launching. When you're doing discovery, you want to talk to customers who are actually going to use the product, not just the buyers, right? So these are two different personas which needs to be kept in mind. When you're actually building, again, there's probably not a lot of difference while building, but while launching, again, the process of launch is very different. Businesses want much more stable products. You have a small number of businesses, so you can't experiment a lot. You have to be more right, is what I feel, when it comes to B2B versus B2C. B2C, you've got, let's say, 100K customers, launch 1K customers, and experiment, A/B test, launch. In B2B, you likely cannot do that unless you have a big business. So you have to be more right in your assumptions, in your hypothesis, and be more right as compared to B2C, where you can also rely on a lot of data. So yeah, more stakeholders involved in B2B, less experimentation, and just be more right is what I've gathered over the 5-6 months that I've spent in a B2B SaaS company. I don't know if anyone else has more to add here.
Excellent. Thank you, Mo. So a question here for Debbie. So the question is, what techniques have you shared with your team to improve on active listening and listening kind of just not just to respond?
Firstly, I've told that story lots and lots of times, so there's definitely something about reminding people of the mistakes that you have made, and the fact that we all make them is the first thing. Beyond that, it's really helping them get into the shoes of the other person. That's the thing that I've found most helpful, is when you're listening to the question that is coming, do like the really annoying thing of thinking about the context that the other person is coming from. What is it that they know that you don't know? Or what is it that you know that they don't? And how do you marry those two things together? And also be much less product managery. Like all of us have this thing of, thought about that, the answer's 7. Oh, thought about that too, the answer's 6. Thought about that, the answer's tomorrow. Because that is part of how we operate. That's part of our job, isn't it? Often, the best way to deal with a scenario like this, where you're maybe not sure where the other person is coming from, or you're not sure you've got all the context, or you're not sure they've really had the chance to give you all their questions or all their thoughts, is to give the other person time. And that's the thing I really encourage my folk to do. Just say, I'll go away, think about that, and I'll come back next week, or I'll come back next time, and we can talk about that. And allow both sides to then get a little bit of headspace, a little bit away, and come back to the table in a slightly different mindset. And even if the answer is still the same as you would have given a week ago, particularly in a big company, a week doesn't matter. Like, that's okay. But it also allows the other person to really know that you have really gone away and thought about it, rather than just being, yep, it's fine, I've sorted that, don't worry about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Debbie. I'm seeing a lot of questions here with respect to the kind of conversation around long-form documents, slides. I was curious if there were kind of any points, I suppose, kind of, is there a space for slides at all? When do you use which? And kind of, what would be your advice to folks in the product domain around the use of slides and long-form documentation?
So if I speak to customers, I would generally always use slides. And, if I need to, essentially we all deal with B2B customers. And sometimes they want to understand if there's a new feature or if it's a private beta, we reach out to them to be part of. And they're like, great, can I see what the user experience would be like? How would it look in the dashboard? What would I see? Sometimes maybe they say, right, here's the API. Here's how the API response might be if you're an API user. Here's the parameters you'd have to update or change. Here's the email you would receive or you'd send out or we do it on your behalf, etc. And I'd use it for that. Internally, I never use slides, and I mean never. And I don't think any PM does at Stripe. It's all documents, and there's nothing. And to be fair, there's nothing worse than on a call and someone's like, "Great, Neil, can you spin up a document on that?" And you're like, that's just more work for me to do. And it's more thinking, more work. And I used to hate that part of it. And I've had to spend time myself and I'd say sharpening my writing skills, but I'm really grateful for it because you do sit. And when I wrote our strategy last year, I had to really think long and hard, and I spent time just thinking. Because as I started to write, I realized, I don't really understand this part, or I don't really understand how I want to do this. And so I had to go off and think. And so I think for anything, obviously like PRDs or strategy documents, or anything where you have to really think deeply and get to some depth of answers, I would say avoid slides, because in my experience, you tend to get more questions than you do on slides than you do with a document. There'll still be feedback, comments, etc. But with slides, they're summary, they're small. It's really hard to fit a lot of information into a slide without it looking too busy, and people tend to just gloss over the detail. And if you've ever listened to the Jeff Bezos piece or interview on this, it's really interesting what he says, and I'm kind of very much anything internally, documents, and then maybe external facing, but yeah, use slides.
So I'll say the thing that I say in response to almost every question is it really depends on your organisation and your context. So for example, a new person recently joined my team and is much keener on long-form documents than sort of organisationally we are as an organisation. And he works mostly with our editorial colleagues. And the first couple of documents he did, like literally all that happened was his grammar and spelling and sentence structure were just corrected, because that's what our editorial colleagues are used to. That's for them what the purpose of the document is. So completely missed the mark entirely. They didn't read the substance or answer the questions. They were like, oh, like you haven't really worded this very well. You can imagine how frustrating that was for him. And what we actually typically have introduced is a process called intelligent challenge, which is somewhere between a slide deck and a full PRD that sort of takes a slide deck and uses a meeting and discussion session to flush it out. With the actual aim of like challenging the premise and getting to the heart of the matter, and yeah, that takes more time, but like it mitigates some of the challenges we have in our organisation when some people's job is professionally to write and other people's isn't. So I think it really is super context dependent.
Brilliant, thank you. So in the interest of making sure that I stick to time today, I think we'll close today with either one more question, or if there's anything any of the panellists would like to share on reflection of the conversation we've had today. No worries if not. No? Okay, all right. Okay, go.
I didn't say it in my chat because it didn't really fit in naturally, but the one thing I would also say is say no a hell of a lot more than you say yes, which is you know, especially when you're launching something in a bigger organization, exactly as you said, you'll get a lot of requests for new features. Somebody will look and say, oh, this would be great. I think this would be fantastic. And I spend most of my time being a Grinch and just saying no. Sales come along, we want this, our customer needs this. I'm like, of course you do, because you've got a deal to sell. And I will just say no to more people, then they probably hate me. But it just means that you're super focused on what you're doing, and you can kind of shut off that. And it's the one thing I'd also say, have the courage to just say no a lot more.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Neil. Brilliant. Okay, folks. Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. One more time, please, for our speakers. Okay, that's it. Please feel free to grab some more drinks and outside.